a bloodline that once nearly swallowed both England and France. A victory at Agincourt pushed Lancaster to the height of glory. A treaty placed the throne of France within their grasp. And then everything fell into the hands of a child not yet 1 year old. Henry VI grew up wearing 2 crowns, yet could not hold even one kingdom together. When his mind collapsed, the throne became an empty chair, and all of England rushed in to fight over it. This is the hidden tragedy of the Lancaster bloodline. The higher it rose, the more brutal the fall. From a throne usurper to a warrior king, from an imperial dream to a death inside the Tower of London, what truly destroyed this family? Let's begin. John of Gaunt, the origin of every tragedy. John of Gaunt was not a king, but he possessed something that can be even more dangerous than a crown-land royal blood and a name heavy enough to make all of England calculate its moves. He was the 3rd surviving son of Edward III. If you look only at birth order, John was not meant to become the center of the kingdom. But in 1359, he married Blanche of Lancaster, and that marriage changed his position completely. It sounds like a typical noble wedding. In reality, it was the door that led John into one of the largest fortunes in England. When Blanche's father died and the male line of the old Lancaster house weakened, John was confirmed as heir to the Lancaster inheritance. By 1362, he became Duke of Lancaster. From that point on, John was no longer just the king's son. He became a massive lord in northern England, controlling land wealth supporters and political influence on a scale that many other nobles could only watch from a distance. And there is a very important detail: the Duchy of Lancaster was not an ordinary territory. It had palatine status, meaning within his lands, the Duke of Lancaster held near autonomous authority. Put simply, John did not just own land, he owned a power base. That was the seed of disaster. John was strong enough to dominate English politics, especially when Richard II came to the throne as a child. But he did not seize the crown. He stood close to it, acting as the powerful uncle, the balancer, the man the court could not ignore. The tragedy is that his son Henry Bolingbroke inherited that exact foundation. The Lancaster lands, the Plantagenet blood, the reputation of John of Gaunt, all of it made Henry powerful enough to return from exile and challenge Richard II. John never wore a crown, but he built a house of power so great that simple loyalty was no longer enough. Henry IV, the usurper and the price of power. Henry Bolingbroke did not rise to the throne as a peaceful heir. He rose as a man pushed out who returned and then took the entire kingdom when the moment opened. At first, Henry was simply the son of John of Gaunt, one of the most powerful men in England. That alone made him dangerous. But under Richard II, the relationship between the king and Henry grew increasingly tense. Henry had once been part of a group of nobles opposing Richard's rule. In the end, Richard chose to remove him from the board. Henry was exiled to France. If the story had ended there, Lancaster might have remained just a powerful family held in check. But in 1399, John of Gaunt died. Henry should have inherited his father's vast Lancaster fortune. Richard II blocked that inheritance. It was a fatal mistake, because for Henry, it was not just about losing land. It was the loss of honor, the loss of his power base, the stripping away of his future as a noble. And Henry came back. In the summer of 1399, while Richard II was in Ireland, Henry crossed the sea and returned to England. At first, he could claim he was only coming back to reclaim his Lancaster inheritance. It sounded reasonable. It sounded lawful. But medieval politics was never as clean as the first statement. As Henry set foot in England, the nobility began to gather around him. Richard had angered too many people. And when the king returned from Ireland, he faced a chilling truth: the kingdom was no longer behind him. Henry did not need a massive slaughter to clear his path. He had something stronger than an army at that moment: the ruling class's hatred of Richard. Richard was captured, deposed, and then died in captivity the following year. Henry Bolingbroke became Henry IV, the first king of the House of Lancaster. This was the moment Lancaster's glory on the throne was born. But it was also the moment the curse began. The problem with a stolen crown is that it never sits still. Henry had the throne, but he had to prove every single day that he deserved it, and England gave him no rest. In Wales, Owain Glyndwr rose in rebellion, declared himself Prince of Wales, and turned the western border into a long, bleeding wound. In England, Henry Hotspur, once an ally, also turned against him in the rebellion of 1403. Then came his health. Henry IV was not only worn down by enemies from the outside, his own body betrayed him from within. Around 1405, he was frequently incapacitated illness, steadily weakening him. A king who had to hold the throne crush, rebellions, and fight against his own failing body. He died in 1413 at just 45 years old. Henry IV defeated Richard II. He placed Lancaster on the throne. But he never gained the one thing a new dynasty needs, most stability. Henry IV stole a crown, then spent the rest of his life proving he deserved to keep it. Henry V, the greatest star of Lancaster. Henry V was the brightest moment of Lancaster. If Henry IV brought the family to the throne through a risky seizure of power, Henry V was the man who turned that throne into legend. He became king in 1413 at the age of 26. And unlike his father, Henry V did not enter his reign feeling the need to justify himself every day. He was young, strong, decisive, and most importantly, he understood what England needed after years of rebellion, division, and doubts about Lancaster's legitimacy. A new dynasty cannot survive forever on explanations. It needs victory. Henry V gave England exactly that. First, he dealt with the fractures at home. The rebellion of Owain Glyndwr in Wales, which had cast a shadow over Henry IV's reign, was gradually suppressed. Henry V did not want to be a king who merely held a seat. He wanted to restore the image of a warrior king, the kind of image England had once seen in Edward III and the Black Prince. And to achieve that, he turned his eyes toward France. The 100 Years' War had already stretched across generations, but under Richard II and Henry IV, ambitions in France had been neglected because of internal chaos. Henry V saw an opportunity. France was divided, its court weakened, and Charles VI was no longer an effective king due to prolonged mental crises. Henry V did not just want a few coastal cities. He wanted to revive Edward III's old claim to the French throne. In 1415, he marched into Normandy. And at Agincourt, Lancaster achieved the moment that created its unmatched stardom. The English army was smaller, more exhausted, and in a more dangerous position. But the English longbow shattered the much larger French cavalry. Agincourt was not just a military victory, it was a declaration of power. A Lancaster king, son of a man once seen as a usurper, now made France tremble. From that point on, Henry V was no longer just the King of England. He became the symbol of a larger future Lancaster, ruling both sides of the English Channel. The peak came in 1420 with the Treaty of Troyes. Under this agreement, Henry V was recognized as the heir to the French throne after Charles VI. He married Catherine of Valois, Charles's daughter, sealing the deal through royal marriage. You have to understand the weight of this moment. Lancaster was no longer just defending the English throne. It was close to turning France into an extension of itself. If Henry V had lived a few more years, history might have taken a completely different path. An Anglo-French monarchy under Lancaster could have become reality, not just an ambition on paper. But history is often most brutal at the moment people believe they have already won. In August 1422, Henry V died in France. He passed away only about 2 months before Charles VI. It was a fatal twist of the knife. The man who had nearly placed all of France into Lancaster's hands did not live long enough to claim it. And what he left behind was not a mature, hardened successor with battlefield experience. He left a child, not yet 1 year old, Henry VI. That was the true tragedy of Henry V. He lifted Lancaster too high, too fast, then vanished before the family could stand steady at that height. His victories created an empire on paper, but his death handed it to a baby who could not speak, could not understand, and certainly could not rule. Henry V nearly gave Lancaster an empire, then left it in the hands of a baby. Catherine of Valois, the woman who connected two crowns. Catherine of Valois entered the Lancaster story not as a woman choosing her own fate. She entered it as a living clause in a treaty. She was the daughter of Charles VI, the French king, weakened by prolonged mental crises. In 1420, after Henry V crushed France's military prestige and pushed the French court into a position where it had to make concessions, the Treaty of Troyes was signed. On paper, this treaty recognized Henry V as heir to the French throne after Charles VI. But a medieval political agreement needed more than signatures. It needed royal blood, it needed marriage, and Catherine became the lock that sealed that dream. When Catherine married Henry V, this marriage was not simply a love story between the King of England and a French princess. It was Lancaster's way of legitimizing its greatest ambition, turning the two crowns of England and France into one shared axis of power. Catherine carried Valois blood. Henry carried Lancaster blood. Their child would not only be the heir to England, he would also be the living symbol of Lancaster's claim in France. That is why Henry VI, the son of Catherine and Henry V, was born already carrying too much weight. The boy was not just a prince. He was the political promise of an entire age. In his veins were English blood, French blood, the glory of Agincourt, the Treaty of Troyes, and the expectation that Lancaster could rule both sides of the English Channel. It sounds like a glorious destiny, but in reality, it was a trap. Because Henry V died too soon in 1422. Charles VI also died not long after. And Catherine, the woman once used to connect two thrones, suddenly became a widow in a dynasty that had not yet stabilized. The Anglo-French dream did not fall into the hands of a grown warrior. It fell into the hands of her son, a child not yet 1 year old. From that moment on, Catherine was no longer the center of a future empire. Real power shifted to the Regency Council, the dukes, the advisors, the men fighting in the name of the child on the throne. Catherine, though the king's mother, was not allowed to become the political operator some people might imagine. She was gradually pushed to the edge of the game that her own marriage had helped create. Then came Owen Tudor. The secret marriage, or at least the secret relationship between Catherine and Owen Tudor, made the court uncomfortable. Owen was not a king. He was not a great prince of Europe. He was a Welshman within the royal service system. To the English nobility, the widow of Henry V tying her life to Owen Tudor was not just a private matter. It was a question of politics, honor, and control over royal blood. Catherine's tragedy is that she was brought into Lancaster to secure the French future, but her later bloodline with Owen Tudor opened the way for a different future. From that Tudor line came Henry Tudor, and many decades later he defeated Richard III at Bosworth, became Henry VII, and married Elizabeth of York to begin the Tudor dynasty. In other words, Catherine did not only give birth to the most tragic Lancaster king, she also accidentally became the root of the dynasty that replaced the entire Old World after the Wars of the Roses. Catherine was supposed to secure Lancaster's future in France, but her bloodline helped create the dynasty that replaced it. Henry VI, the child whose hidden illness broke the throne. Henry VI is where the entire Lancaster tragedy exploded. He was not born like an ordinary child. He was born under the shadow of Henry V, the man who had just lifted Lancaster to the peak of military glory, and Catherine of Valois, the French princess, used to connect two crowns. When Henry V died in August 1422, Henry VI was not yet 9 months old. A baby who could not speak became King of England. Then, only a few weeks later, Charles VI of France also died. Under the Treaty of Troyes, Henry VI was regarded as heir to the French throne. On paper, this boy was the center of a massive dream, a Lancaster monarchy ruling both England and France. It sounds like a glorious destiny. But in truth, it was a bomb placed inside a cradle. Because those two kingdoms were not peaceful at all, England and France were still trapped in the 100 Years' War. The French were not ready to bow to an English child. In England, power fell into the hands of the Regency Council, the dukes, the advisors, and the men who fought for influence in the king's name. Henry had the crown, but for many early years of his life, he had no real power. And when he grew up, the problem only became clearer. Henry VI was not like his father. He was not the warrior king type. He was gentle, devout, peace-loving, more interested in education and religion than the battlefield. Those qualities could make a decent human being. But in 15th century England, among ambitious nobles, war with France, and a dynasty still doubted for its legitimacy, they became fatal weaknesses. He was the perfect symbol of the tragedy of too much inheritance, too little power, too many titles, too little political will, too many expectations, too little ability to control them. By 1453, everything broke at once. In France, English power nearly collapsed. Normandy, Bordeaux, and Gascony were lost one after another, and by the end of that year, the English were left holding almost only Calais. The dream Henry V had left behind dissolved into smoke. At that exact moment, Henry VI suffered a serious mental collapse. He became unresponsive to the world around him. He did not speak. He did not govern. He did not fully recognize what was happening. Even when his son, Edward of Westminster, was born in October 1453, Henry showed no clear reaction. Think about that detail. The Lancaster heir was born, the future of the entire bloodline appeared, yet the king at the center of the dynasty seemed to vanish right on the throne. This was the real hidden mental illness of the story, not a small secret inside the palace, but an illness sitting at the very center of the machinery of power. A kingdom had a king, but the king was no longer present in the way a kingdom needed, and that empty space invited others to step in. Richard, Duke of York, already the center of dissatisfaction with the Lancaster court, was made Lord Protector. To many people, York looked like a solution, a powerful noble experienced of Plantagenet blood capable of keeping order. But to Margaret of Anjou and the Lancaster faction, he was a direct threat to the succession of Edward of Westminster. From here, political discontent was no longer a whisper inside the court. It became factions, then confrontation, then war. Henry VI did not merely lose control of the kingdom. He became the living void at the center of the throne, and everyone around him began fighting to control that void. Henry VI did not just lose control of the kingdom, he became the empty center everyone fought to control. Margaret of Anjou and Edward of Westminster. The mother who fought for the king, the son who died with Lancaster's hope. Margaret of Anjou was not born into Lancaster blood, but when Henry VI began collapsing under the weight of the throne, she became the one who kept the family's final flame alive. She married Henry VI in a political marriage at a time when England was still trying to cling to what remained of its ambitions in France. But Margaret was not the kind of queen who only stood behind the curtain. When Henry was weak, when the court was divided, when mental illness meant the king was no longer truly steering the ship, Margaret stepped directly into that empty space. What made her striking was that she was almost the complete opposite of her husband. Henry was passive. Margaret was fierce. Henry avoided conflict. Margaret charged into it. Henry was the Lancaster symbol on the throne. Margaret was the one who turned that symbol into political action. And her greatest reason was Edward of Westminster, the only son of Henry VI. To Margaret, Edward was not just a child, he was the future of Lancaster. If Edward lived and inherited the throne, Lancaster blood still had a road back. If Edward was lost, nearly everything went dark. But the more she protected her son, the more dangerous an enemy Margaret became in the eyes of the Yorkists. They did not see her only as a queen. They saw her as the fighting mind acting for a weakened king. That was what made the conflict increasingly impossible to reconcile. By 1471, everything converged at Tewkesbury. The Lancaster side was defeated. Edward of Westminster died after the battle, and with that death, Margaret did not just lose her son. She lost the greatest political reason to keep fighting. Lancaster still had its name, but its direct future had been buried with that young heir. Margaret fought like Lancaster still had a future, but Tewkesbury buried that future with her son. The legacy of a family. Lancaster did not disappear the way a dynasty usually disappears. It did not end with one single defeat or one final king falling and everything closing at once, but broke apart layer by layer, generation by generation, through one wrong decision after another. John of Gaunt created a power base too large. Henry IV seized the throne and opened a dynasty that would always be questioned. Henry V lifted Lancaster to a height that almost touched the dream of ruling both England and France. Then Henry VI lost everything from the inside because he could not control himself. Margaret fought in place of a king who no longer had the strength to be king, and Edward of Westminster died before he could become the answer to the family's future. This was not one isolated failure, but a chain of things pushed too far with no way back. What makes Lancaster still haunting today is that it is not only history, but a repeating pattern power arriving too fast, expectations growing larger than ability, and an entire system depending on one person who could not carry it. Lancaster did not lack land armies or reputation. What they lacked was stability at the center, and a throne without someone truly in control always invites others to fight for it. So if Henry V had lived longer, would Lancaster have become a real empire, or had the problem already been built into the way their power was constructed from the beginning? If you feel this story is not only the past, but also something strangely familiar in how the world works, share your thoughts, and if you want me to keep uncovering stories like this, do not forget to subscribe to the channel.
This content is for informational and entertainment purposes only, thoughtfully compiled from public archives, historical records, and classic articles. While we strive for accuracy and balanced storytelling, some details from Hollywood's golden age remain unconfirmed and should be treated as speculative. We encourage viewers to draw their own independent conclusions. If this journey through Hollywood's shadows resonated with you, please leave a gentle like and subscribe with the bell icon so you never miss our next chapter. To continue uncovering the forgotten tragedies of the Golden Age, simply select the video on your screen right now. Thank you for keeping their memories alive.